Hello again, and welcome to Ava's tragic tales of the early LA goth scene. And I do say tragic because it seems like everybody I know that became my friend winds up dying. Sad. But by all means, do not consider that a reflection on me because, well, things happen. And when you live on the periphery, things aren't always as we would hope they would be. So, as we alluded on a previous video, we were talking about my dear friend Tamlyn of London After Midnight, who I'd become closely acquainted with and friends with after April of 1998 in the wake of Roz's suicide. Forgive me for doing the goth thing here and lighting up a clove. But as I discussed earlier, these stories are a little hard to tell, but they must be told. And my reason for even going there, not because I'm desperate for content, I certainly am not. I have plenty of things I can say or do. As you probably noticed, I'm starting to pursue a little music again, and it's been fun. But we're here to tell some stories while we still remember them, as well as we can remember them. So the purpose of today's video in discussing Tamlyn, better known at least in the animation world as Henry Porch, he was a brilliant sound engineer in addition to being an excellent keyboard player, and he was probably best remembered outside of music for doing the sound engineering for a cartoon known as Ren and Stimpy. That was his biggest one, and at the time that me and him became closely acquainted, he was working on a show called Ripping Friends out of a little studio in Burbank. And occasionally when I was hurting for money because, I worked in film and film is seasonal, he would, throw me a bone and say, hey, you want to come help pull some sound files? It's just easy shit. I'll buy you lunch and I'll pay you too. And he'd come grab me and, and next thing you know, he's got burgers and beers and everything I need, and all I got to do is just keep pulling sound files. So, if every cartoon from that studio sounded like the damn Flintstones, well, it's probably my fault. Well, Tamlyn, and like I dare say, I'm going to burst the bubble here because I had a problem with the obituary that was written for him. And while I appreciate that one was written for him, I had some problems with it. And again, this is not about Sean Brennan. But what bothered me was that there was a transgender person who identified themselves as being transgender, and they said something that got to me, that they saw themselves up on that stage through Tamlyn. And because of that, they followed the band, and, they had a lot of sympathy for him and, admiration for him, and that's fine and everything. But, and here's the part that's going to upset some people, Tamlyn was not a true transgender. Sorry. You see, I was a transgender in his life at that time. From 1998 all the way until roughly 2001, he had absolutely no interest in transgender affairs. He had no interest in pursuing that life. And he saw how hard it was for me. I mean, he would accommodate me and a lot, and made it so I can go swimming in, his building's pool because my building didn't have one. And I wasn't welcome in too many places. I had just come off the movie set of Almost Famous, and we were put up in a hotel in San Diego, and they called security and the police because I didn't have a proper bathing suit. And at that time I had a pretty good sized rack with big ass nipple rings. And well, that was typical for the time period. But they didn't want to acknowledge me as a trans woman at the time. So, it's like, okay, you want to treat me like a male? Okay, I'm going to go in the pool like one. But I'm just not built like one. And so they soon found out. But Tamlyn was all really cool with all that shit, but he had absolutely no interest in any of that stuff. In fact, up for that whole time, I would ask him, well, what's going on with you? Because you're very fucking quiet. And being Latinx that I am, people that are quiet, I get on our nerves. In certain circles, that would be considered disrespect. And respect is, bigger than anything with us. And he would explain to us that he identified not as a transgender person, but as a Klinefelter. Now, I didn't really know what that really meant, and I just thought that was some bullshit term he came up with. But no, there really was something, and today you would recognize it as a higher spectrum autistic, which makes a lot of sense today. But at the time, we didn't have the terminology. Well, in the transgender world, there was, I identify as trans femme, which meaning that, I'm all about hyper femininity. You can see by the way I wear my hair, the way I do my makeup, the clothes I wear, and the accessories I tote around is like super ass girly, more girly than most women would even dare venture. Maybe a little more typical for a 1960s Elvis movie for you. Who knows? Las Vegas. Who knows? That's my style anyway. Love it or leave it, doesn't matter to me. But back in the 1990s, they had no such term as trans femme. They had, most trans people you would meet were largely streetwalkers, sex workers, and the highly exploited. You would run into, maybe on rare occasions, you run into someone like me who would keep a low profile, and because they didn't relate to the working girls, and the working girls were pretty fierce, and they'd kick your ass if you said or did something out of the line. They could be pretty vicious back then. The only safe haven was, there was this cross-dresser bar, and so what few trans femmes I knew of at the time would hang there, and which cross-dressers, well, they're a couple, they got their thing, but it's not the same as us. You see, here's the thing about what makes a transgender person a true transgender person, and mind you, you fucking people under 40 love to throw that word gatekeeping around. This is not gatekeeping. This is just a fucking fact that exists. It doesn't matter if you're getting SRS or you're a trans femme or you're somewhere in between. If you are a true transgender person, you're going to have what we call the awakening. And it's a series of strange dreams or events that takes place around age 4, age 5 that tells you that you are different from everyone else. Now, mind you, I played soccer with a friend who was flamboyantly gay. He was, flaming as they came, all right? And everybody fucking knew it, but no one was going to say anything. At least, father was the coach, so he wasn't going to say any shit, and I had no reason to dislike him. It's like he was different. I was different, but I knew I was not like him. I didn't know what I was. Wouldn't know for a long time. I thought initially, advanced crossdresser? No, it was much more than that, as it later turns out. Well, the early transgender people that I met, 90% of them were sex workers. And a few people had their own businesses that they ran out of their homes, so they kept a low profile. There just wasn't very many opportunities outside of that didn't involve sexual exploitation back then. I was probably one of the few people that worked in the legitimate femme industry, and it was hard to find work. It really was, and it still is, actually. But it does. Things are better now, but of course, that felon 47 and his gang is making things very difficult for us right now. But Tamlyn didn't have this experience. Therefore, he wasn't a true transgender. Tamlyn identified as this Klinefelter, which is a higher autistic person. But where he did come close, see, again, they didn't have the terminology back in the 1990s. So there was no such thing as trans femme back then. He wasn't a trans femme. What he was, and this is based on how I knew him. Today, Tamlyn would have fit perfectly with the NB crowd. The people that are non-binary, they're gender fluid, they're a little gender queer, but they're not fully us, and they're not fully cis people either. You know, they're somewhere on the periphery. There's nothing wrong with that. But at the time, the terminology didn't exist, and the community for, you know, these non-binary people didn't exist yet either. I mean, there was just the gay community. You were gay, you were straight, you were lesbian, you were trans. And if you were trans, chances are you were supposed to be with men. You were supposed to get SRS. Or if you're a trans mask, well, then you had to be super ass butch or I mean, rules at the time were pretty draconian and enforced by our own people, which I didn't like very much. So me coming from the punk rock world and death rock world, I wasn't very good with rules, not at all. I don't like being told what to do. I still don't. So if you're listening, MAGA, fuck you. Anyway, and you two in the UK, as for you two. Well, so Tamlyn, like I said, he would have done really well today had he made it. But Tamlyn, as far as being transgender, no, he wasn't. In fact, he'd help me get my meds, and he will watch me take my injections, and he would tell me how much he was terrified of needles. He says, "Oh, I would never want to do hormones because I'm afraid of injections. I hate needles and all that shit." Of course, 3 years later, he'd be asking me, "Can you help me do this? I'm afraid of needles." And there'd come that point because things after 9/11, things got really fucked up. I mean, there was a big shift in the community. There was a big, this damn thing goes now, so fuck that. There was just a lot of difficulties, and the mood of the country was, we were on a war footing, and there was a lot of fear and paranoia. Every day the news would tell us that the threat level was this, and everyone's expecting the next 9/11, the next World Trade Center to drop, and people were scared shitless. Some people joined the military. Some people decided to go to school and pursue something serious and what have you, and I couldn't be around a bunch of young trans girls that are looking for a fucking sugar daddy to survive on and didn't give a rat's ass about what went on. I mean, I knew people that lost people in 9/11, and, you know, having been to New York and was dating a girl at the time that was living in Brooklyn that was supposed to be there that morning, of course this fucking affected me in very deep ways, and it led to my decision, because it became so difficult to get, you know, my meds. I figured, well, maybe, you know, I'll dial this back, and maybe I'll just live as an androgynous goth person for what I did before, and no one's going to really notice. Well, yeah, I did that for a little while, but ultimately it didn't work out very well, and I regretted leaving the life. But I no longer related, not that I ever really did relate with the trans world at that time, because, like I said, 90% sex workers, few odd stragglers had their own businesses. And then there was what you find more today, you'll find more people that are very comfortable. They're just want to be housewives, or they just want to be nothing really special. They just want to embrace being a girl, and nothing wrong with that. But the few that I knew at the time, they wanted to become invisible, and that to me was like death. I mean, I love the spotlight. I love being on television. I love being on the big screen. Nothing used to get my rocks off more than I'd be in a movie theater and I'd see my face plastered on the screen, 20 feet tall. I mean, who wouldn't fucking get off of that? And, the next day you walk on the street and, hey, were you on 90210? Or I saw you on Angel or some shit like that. And yeah, it was gratifying and, validating. I'm considering that, given my first marriage, it's like anything I accomplished didn't matter because I was living under that woman's shadow. She was, Singer 45 Grave, and, it was kind of hard not to be literally suffocated by, her fame. And so this is one of the reasons why a lot of marriages to famous people don't work out, because sometimes you just will say, hey, I did something on my own and it didn't involve them, It is what it is. But Tamlyn, as I said, he would have done really well today with the current scene, being that there is now a lot of gender inclusiveness. There's a lot of gender diversity, gender queer. But Tamlyn did not have that awakening. He had absolutely no interest in being a transgender person. He didn't identify with it at all. He sympathized, mildly curious. I mean, he did have cross-dresser tendencies, but he was very, very quiet about it and very in the closet. And I wouldn't say, I mean, I knew cross-dressers and he really wasn't one of them either, But how he got on hormones, well, let's just say that the people that got between us were living the life, a very destructive life, and needed somebody to latch on to. And unfortunately for Tamlyn, they were it. And set Tamlyn on a road that I could not be a part of. And I will discuss that later. But, and again, I'm not saying anything wrong about my friend. I mean, I loved the man, It's unfortunate that we did not resolve our differences, but these differences were complex. And they involve the death of somebody that got between us. And I will talk about it later. I have to find a way to tell you this without sounding like I'm the most evil black witch you ever met, or I'm responsible for things that I'm not responsible for. I mean, do I have any nice things to say about these people? No, I don't, because I don't want to give them any oxygen. They stole enough from my friend, and they stole enough from me. So, again, we're going to talk about Tamlyn and our tragic friendship and the days that led him on the course to him being discovered dead on his chair. Nobody checked on him, and he died alone. And I told him, if you embark on this path, you could very well wind up dying alone somewhere, and no one's going to know until it's too late. I hate being right sometimes. And again, it hurt me deeply to hear of his passing. I took comfort in knowing that, in spite of where he went, that he still cared about me and checked on me and asked about me, as I did the same about him. We were just too goddamn stubborn to come into an agreement. And it's the same thing with, I have a friend in the UK that we were so much alike. The late Paul Lanyon, another one is gone. So much alike, and we butted heads viciously sometimes. But he got a little too abusive when he got drunk, and I wasn't going to put up with that shit. But when he passed too, it deeply affected me. But Tamlyn's death was unnecessary and tragic, and I wish he would have listened to me. He might still be here. And had he only waited just a little longer, who knows, he would have found his place. But instead, he tried to fit into something that he wasn't. So I'm sorry to say, for those of you who are trans and you looked up to him for that reason, Well, I mean, yes, he did go to Phuket. He did all that stuff. But deep down in here, he wasn't meant to really do that. He was meant to do something else. But again, when you're trying to fit in with something and you're being pressured by someone who's basically trying to rob you blind, it's easy to become manipulated. And ultimately, you're left broken alone. And that's what happened to my friend. As sad as it was. But we'll talk more about it. And I'm going to reveal some things about his private life that some people may not be happy to hear about, but it's important to understand who he was. Because, I mean, there were people that loved him. He had his fans. But he was very isolated, very alone. And I wish you could all have known the person I jokingly, I was a big Goodfellas fan, so when Joe Pesci would harass Henry, he'd be like, Henry. I'd do that with Tamlyn, but, and I have my moments, and I miss him. I miss all my lovely friends. I've lost so many. So you see me out dancing on the dance floor and there's nobody else there and I look like I fucking own the goddamn thing, it's because I'm dancing with my friends. They're all around me. And you'll see it really lurking in the shadows. The cigarette traces and the smoke machines under the red fog lights and lasers. You'll see them, as I do. Until we see them again. There's more to the story, and I'll share. Please take care. Love you all.